Good day. This is Daniela Ellerbeck, legal advisor to Freedom of Religion South Africa, commonly known as 4SA. In today's weekly 4SA video, I will be joined by 4SA's fellow legal advisor, attorney Liesl Pretorius. Welcome, Liesl.
Good morning, Daniela. Great to join you today.
So, being able to live out our faith publicly, freely, without fear of hindrance or reprisal, or worse even, persecution, this is a vital aspect of our constitutional right to religious freedom. Now, in your work with 4SA, would you say that religious expression is sufficiently protected, or is it something that you see as being increasingly under threat?
Well, Daniela, there's the letter of the law, and then there's the law in practice or real life, The South African Constitution, as well as many international treaties. In other words, laws, treaties are laws that are binding on South Africa, so our government must honor them. They expressly protect the right to religious freedom and the right to freedom of expression, which obviously is also an added level of protection for religious expression. So generally speaking, according to the letter of the law, there has been and there still is robust protection for religious expression, but there are some legal developments that are concerning. For example, the emergence and the proliferation of hate speech laws. Now, the idea behind hate speech laws sounds very noble and might be even very well-intentioned, but as usual, the devil's in the details. The problem with them is that you don't want them to cast a too wide net, because if their net is cast too wide, what effectively happens is that legitimate speech can be ensnared in that net, and speech that is legitimate and that should be protected could be punished. So this is not only a serious threat to religious expression and religious freedom, but to general freedom of expression and even the health of any democracy. So many ordinary persons of faith may well find that their sincerely held beliefs they love and views that they lovingly express, especially more traditional views on topics such as sexual ethics, gender, that these views may mistakenly be labeled by some people as hate speech. And there are persons of faith who have faced, I would say, unwarranted harassment and vilification, and some have even lost their jobs, and especially in overseas jurisdictions, because what they have said have been labeled hate speech, even if further down the road it was found that no, in fact, it wasn't hate speech, it was legitimate speech. In South Africa, we have the hate speech bill that's currently before Parliament, and this bill criminalizes hate speech. So now you might even face criminal charges for a view that is actually just unpopular, even if you express it very respectfully. The current version of the hate speech bill, we must say off the bat, it's a vast improvement on the first version. For that, we're grateful, but there still are numerous issues that do need to be dealt with. Primarily, the definition of hate speech is too wide. So if the definition of a crime is too wide, it captures too many things in that definition of a crime. Then, bizarrely, the hate speech bill does not define what hatred means. So how, if we don't know what hate is, will we know if speech is hateful?
Exactly.
So that's a bit of a major oversight. And then there is a religious exemption clause, which is supposed to protect legitimate religious speech, but it is worded in such a way that it's actually very weak. It doesn't offer any real protection. So there's still, like, the bottom line of all this together is that there's a very real possibility that legitimate religious speech, in other words, speech that is worthy of constitutional protection, will be caught in the hate speech bill's net. And that is a real threat to religious expression. And one of the major concerns with this bill is that if you're found guilty of hate speech, you can be sent to jail for up to 8 years for saying something, And for this reason, we as 4SA, we have, as you know, we've put a tremendous effort into raising awareness amongst the faith communities of South Africa about the hate speech bill, the problematic aspects, and also helping people who want to speak up to be able to do that.
So, turning to another aspect of religious freedom. Nowadays, many religious parents are concerned that it's becoming harder and harder to raise their children in line with their own faith and their moral views. Now, what rights, if any, do parents have when it comes to religious and moral education of their children, especially if, say, their child is in a public school and not a private religious school that aligns with the parents' religious views, or homeschooled by the parents? What rights do parents have if they send their child to the local public school, but they also want to raise their child in line with their faith and worldview?
Well, Daniela, parents need to know, and this is very important. Parents need to understand that they themselves, not the state, not anyone else, bear the primary responsibility for the education of their children. And when the law gives you a responsibility, you will have an accompanying right. So the accompanying right is the inalienable, so it cannot be taken away from you, the inalienable right to choose the kind of education that you as the parent believe is best for your children. And parents enjoy this right and this responsibility, not because it's granted to them by the Constitution or some law. They have this right by the simple fact that they are their children's parents. So what the law does, it doesn't grant this right. Parents have this right. The law only recognizes that this is the right that parents have and confirms it. We have an education white paper 1 in South Africa. So a white paper is an official government policy document. So if you have an official policy document for a specific sector, for example, basic education, laws in that sector need to conform to that policy document. Now, Education White Paper 1 confirms this inalienable right that parents have to choose the kind of education that they feel is best for the child, and specifically states that this choice includes the cultural and religious basis of their child's education. And the white paper also confirms that parents have the right to be consulted regarding the education that the child receives. So what is your child actually being taught? So you need to be made aware and you have to be consulted properly. We would say there needs to be meaningful engagement. The government can't just give you like, oh, here's a little info session or something like that. What's also important to note is that the sentiments that are expressed in the white paper, they're echoed in numerous international legal instruments, which are laws, treaties, that kind of thing, conventions that are binding on the Republic. So that means the South African government has a legal duty, their obligation to recognize and uphold these rights. And I'm not going to quote from all the documents. They basically express the same sentiment worded in various ways, but it's about parents' right to choose the moral basis of the education of their child, to raise their child in accordance with their own views and beliefs and convictions, and the state is not allowed to interfere. And actually the state should recognize this right of the parent, and the state should support the parent. And even in one of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, it mentions that the promotion of traditional African values. That's even written in there. So practically, in the South African public school system, this means that your child cannot be taught normative content. So normative content is value-laden content or ideological content. For example, comprehensive sexuality education that has certain views on sex and sexuality. They cannot be taught this content if it's at odds with the moral values and or religious beliefs that you want to raise your child according to. That's why it's so important in the context of the comprehensive sexuality education that the department acknowledged that if you do not want your child to be taught this material, you can opt out of that. It's in a recognition and respect of those rights that parents have. You need to remember as a parent, you have the right to be informed. You have the right to be properly consulted prior to content that is such content being introduced in the public school system. And this is also why a school governing body is so important. The school governing body is the vehicle through which parents' rights, their inalienable right to choose the education that is best for their child, finds expression in the public school system. So we encourage parents to be involved in the school governing body, to vote for the school governing body, to stand for the school governing body, or just generally be involved in your child's school life. You really can't afford not to. And also from our side, Boris is in continuous contact with the Department of Basic Education, about documents that are being drafted or coming out to ensure that religious freedom and parental rights remain respected and protected in the basic education sector.
To summarize, the state can't teach values to your children that you don't agree with. And if there is content, such as, for example, you mentioned CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education, the scripted lesson plans and educator guides that the department drafted for meeting the life orientation and life skills subject outcomes that were set, and you don't agree with the form that content takes, because you find it normative, so you find it teaching values that are in contradiction to your own, then you, as part of the school governing body, hopefully, or with relationship with other parents on the school governing body, can say, no, we don't want to teach this content to our children in the life skills and life orientation subjects that they need to attain. But we are happy to meet those subjects' outcomes by teaching them this content and these books that are in line with our values. So I can, as a parent, or as parents of a school, we can say we don't want this content to meet the outcomes, but we want other content that will meet the outcomes and that we agree with.
That's correct. And I think it's important to note in the public school context that public schools should be ideologically neutral because it's a public school, it belongs to the community. Everybody has a place at the table in a public school.
Turning to another aspect, most persons of faith appreciate the importance of practicing their faith in community with others. So whether that's attending temple or synagogue or church, are there any important legal developments that faith communities need to be aware of?
Well, currently, Parliament is considering the expropriation bill. We have already delivered written submissions to both houses of the National Parliament, also to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. We've delivered oral submissions to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament and intend also delivering oral submissions to the National Council of Provinces at the opportune time. Now, our concern with the bill, obviously our mandate is religious freedom. And our concern with the bill stems from the fact that the way that the bill is currently worded, faith communities could potentially lose their property. So this is land, could be a church building, mosque, synagogue, temple, training facility, or something else, and potentially not even receive any compensation for it. Because religious communities do own property, and the expropriation bill enables the expropriation of property. This bill is very controversial because there is this provision for no compensation. And our constitution says that compensation must be just and equitable. So the question is, can no compensation ever be just and equitable? And in this regard, we suggested to Parliament, both national and the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, that please approach the Constitutional Court on this issue, get what we call a declaratory order. Because if we don't have constitutional clarity about this major aspect of the bill, what it means is if this bill passes, it will be immediately open to constitutional attack. You don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't want to be passing laws that are unconstitutional, especially when people are facing, potentially losing property and facing potentially not getting paid anything for it.
Now, turning to the last aspect of our discussion today, what are some of the most important developments internationally that are affecting religious freedom and freedom of belief that South Africans need to be aware of? And what can ordinary South African citizens do to ensure that our religious freedom is not undermined or eroded in South Africa?
I would say one of the most alarming trends, Daniela, and we've touched actually on this, is how hate speech laws are being used to silence Christians and other persons of faith, or other persons who might not even be persons of faith, but the whole conservative views. Expressing Bible-based beliefs in some overseas countries that you would think are very free, democratic societies, have cost them their jobs and even face jail time. Now, ultimately, many of these persons were acquitted or vindicated, but only after enduring this whole, I would say, traumatic ordeal of being arrested, being put on trial. Obviously, it's over social media, what's happening to you. And they're simply respectfully expressing their views on things such as sexuality and gender and sexual ethics. Something that is, in a traditional democracy, would be protected speech. And one of the most insidious consequences of hate speech laws and this kind of trend is self-censorship. How many people will silence themselves? And what does that do? That undermines religious freedom. It impoverishes democracy. However well-intentioned, hate speech laws are essentially anti-freedom.
Liesl, thank you so much for what was a very enlightening discussion on various different aspects and issues that are happening in the religious freedom world at the moment.
Thank you, Daniela.
Good day. This is Daniela Ellerbeck, the Legal Advisor to Freedom of Religion South Africa. Remember to like and share this video and then click on the subscribe button to make sure you never miss our video updates on vital religious freedom issues.